everyone watching and listening. Good morning from New Jersey this time, and welcome back to the Free Radical Podcast, episode number 3. This is your host, Swami Padmanabha, and I'm here today at Nam Rasa's house here in New Jersey. Deeply honored to be in the company of one of the most remarkable radical personalists I've had the privilege to meet till today, Deva Madhava Prabhu. Deva Madhava, thank you so much for joining.
Krishna. Thank you for having me, Maharaj. Honored to be here.
So let me share a few words about Deva Madhava Prabhu, a brief biography on him, and then we will start officially. So Deva Madhava Das met devotees in the summer of 2010 at ISKCON Detroit and began a small center in Ann Arbor, Michigan in 2012. That effort grew into the community known as the Harmony Collective in nearby Ypsilanti. That includes a temple, farm, restaurant, and yoga studio. Deva remains the director of that community while happily married to Brindavani Devidasi and fantasizing about being a writer. Not only you are fantasizing about that, so hopefully that becomes actual reality very soon. So I'd like to share one second the link of the Harmony Collective for those who would like to know more about Deva Madhava and the community, the harmonycollective.org. So personally, I've met Deva Madhava Prabhu, I think last year, 2 years ago or something like that. Personally, first time.
First time was last summer. Yes, Maharaj.
Last summer. Yeah. I mean, I personally have these weird dynamics that I've met and not only me, myself. I think that I meet people first time online. We get to know each other for a few decades and then we meet personally after that time. So I was very honored to visit the Harmony Collective last year. Very beautiful community, and I really feel Deva Madhava Prabhu to be one of those birds of the same feather that we flock together. So I'm very honored to have him today here.
Look forward to having you back, Maharaj.
Yeah, we are going there very soon. So before starting officially with the topic, Deva Madhava, I would like to ask you a few words regarding why you consider important joining this conversation today, and what in that connection, what radical personalism means to you.
It's important for me to spend time with people that inspire me. So that's why I was looking forward to being here, Maharaj. I always enjoy your association. And particularly, I'll say that it's so refreshing to see a sannyasi, somebody who's settled into his sannyasa ashram, being so adamant about the value of integrating our humanity in our Krishna consciousness. And I recognize that others are recognizing your presentation of that, the need for it, and the poignancy that you're in the particular ashram you're in, and even have the kind of devotional background you have, the ups and downs, and etc. So for all that, I'm very happy to lend whatever weight I might have to supporting the growing of this conversation across the devotional community. And it's a conversation I felt I've in my own way tried to churn, and I see you've just leveled up the whole dynamic, especially giving language, like the idea of radical personalism, giving language to ideas that have for many people only been felt so far, kind of intuited or experienced but not verbalized, and therefore can't be shared as forcefully. And so I'm happy to lend my part as you've invited me to do.
Thank you. Thanks so much for your authenticity, basically. So today we'll be talking with Deva Madhava Prabhu. The title of today's episode is The Individual as the Heart of the Institution. And personally, I chose this topic, and I chose Deva Madhava. I've thought about Deva Madhava for this topic since, for me, that's one of his specialties. I've heard him talking with him, I think maybe the first time in Nam Rasa's podcast, and talking a little bit about some of these topics as well. He recently gave a very interesting lecture on ISKCON University as well. Many of you may have seen it, if not, recommend it. Also, he made this interesting lecture yesterday in the Progressive Vaishnavism Conference, and he will be touching up on related topics, I think, on the retreat we will be having with him and Jai Jagannath Prabhu this coming next weekend from July 28th to 30th, in case you may like to join, here's the link as well. It's not such an easy one. tickettailor.com/events slash the Harmony Collective slash 9394116 for those who are only listening. So that's today's topic, basically. The individual as the heart of the institution. As usually, I try to relate that with some section of the book, Radical Personalism, which is here, and I will read that section now, which is one of the different radicals, so to say, in the manifesto chapter. In this case, the corresponding radical is called radical organization, which is in page 71. So I'll read this brief point, and then we'll start our unfolding officially. So it says like this: whatever difficulties we may be experiencing as a community are not necessarily related to our institutions per se, but in most cases to the fallacy of institutionalism. Gaudiya Vaishnavism is to be first and foremost concerned with real people, not with projects. When each individual heart is properly honored and cared for, projects and institutions will then naturally fall into their proper roles and functions. We call this radical organization. So basically, the above section inspired the title for today's episode, The Individual as the Heart of the Institution. So any thoughts to do the kickstart, Deva Madhava, in this connection you would like to share?
Again, Maharaj, I feel like you're giving language to kind of intuition and the need of the hour that a lot of devotees have felt, or at least perceive the need of. And I'm reminded, as you read that section, from a devotee who inspired me to really focus on this track of taking care of people and the value of the institution really just being a measure of how well it's supporting individuals. There's a devotee, His Grace Kalakanta Prabhu, who's famous for engineering the Krishna House project in Gainesville to its present place of prominence and effectiveness. And I heard him give a seminar some years ago, and he talked about when he took over the project, and it was a skeleton crew barely running on this Mahavakya from Prabhupada that Prashadam should be distributed in Gainesville. So something had been maintained there around this instruction for that period of time, but it was quite, it was a trickle of what you would expect it to be and compared to what it is today. And Kalakanta Prabhu talks about a moment where he decided to start praying to their Gornitai deities. Instead of please send me people and money so that we can execute these projects, he started praying, please send us people so we can take care of them. Please send us people so we can take care of them. That was his sense of purpose now at Krishna House Gainesville. And they didn't call it that at the time, I don't think. I think they changed the name around that time. And when that shift in focus came, that let us just be able to support whomever, however they need to be supported. Not that we have an a priori idea of supporting you means getting you to wash the pots, because that's the support we need. Getting you to, cook sabji for 1,000 people, because that's what we do here. Rather, what do you need and how are we able to provide it for you? And today his project stands as what it is, and the example that many people see it as for that reason. So it was a real pivotal moment in my own understanding, which was budding around the naive kind of misconception of what it means to have a community in a project, and the reality of what an actual Krishna conscious experience would be for people.
Thanks for that kickstart. I really appreciate the point you made on Kalakanta Prabhu. Because yes, sometimes this idea of taking care of people is seen just like a means and not so much like the goal, so to say, of the institution. No, like okay, we take care of them because it's something we have to do in order for something else to happen, so to say. So it's more seen as in utilitarian terms, so to say. No, like you are useful for us. Taking care of you is useful for us, so that brings forth that particular result. But actually, the ultimate result is taking care of people to the point of that they become pure devotees. Basically, ultimately, that's the goal of each one of us. So But for that to happen, yeah, we need to be taken care of. So that's a, yeah, it's a simple between the difference between means and goal. Again, I really appreciate the point of taking care of people as a goal of our service, so to say, because on a daily basis, I like to say, sometimes it may sound a little extreme, but in the ultimate goal of Gaudiya Vaishnavism, uh, Radha and Krishna will be on a daily basis about to die in separation of each other. So our service will be to take care of them so they don't die in separation.
Mm,
So if you want to take care of the divine couple eternally, I mean, you have to begin somewhere, and that may be taking care of other people.
right.
No, but again, taking care of others will be the goal of life. You'll in eternity will be you doing that forever. It's not just okay, I'll take care of you. So that gives a particular result, which is in the form of whatever, bigger structure, more potential
Mm.
in outreach or whatever. Which again, we are not against that, but that's has something that has to happen in a very natural way. Yes, a byproduct of taking care of people. So I remember you mentioned that once. I think it was in your podcast with Nam Rasa that I saw a few years ago, and you mentioned this simple point, which but basically it's like, yeah, we are not to take care of the institution; we are to take care of people. Similar in those lines, like people will be. I think in my book I mentioned something to that effect. Like institutions are not mere buildings or papers or bank accounts or hierarchy systems, but institutions are its members, basically. No, and therefore institution cannot be better than their own members because institutions are their members.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
without real people, there is no actual project, basically. No? If you take the real people out, which project remains? No?
I had this very pointed experience in New York once. I was going to New York City to serve the Harinam ashram there.
Mm,
We would go once a week, or I'm sorry, once a month for about a week, and we did that for 4 years or so. So we helped the ashram kind of get established there, and we were waiting on the train platform in the subway to go to the Harinam spot, and
mm,
5 or 6 brahmacharis all wearing saffron and shaved up, and I was there also in my Hare Krishna traditional attire, and we're all goofing around on the plane platform, enjoying our position as the highest people doing the highest thing on our way to prove to everybody how good and religious we are. And we were right by the steps coming down to the platform, and I noticed out of the corner of my eye that there was this old woman trying to make it down the steps with like 2 bags and a cart, and just like an old fragile woman carrying way too much stuff down these dangerous steps. And if I'd had like another 3 or 4 seconds to like create that shakshitva, that distance from goofing around with the bhaktas to like, oh yeah, help the old lady, I would have been able to bring myself around to it. But by Krishna's grace, some other gentleman standing and watching acted much quicker than I did, went up the steps, took the old lady's stuff, brought it back down. And then he turned and looked right at me and he said, "It's a shame. All these religious people standing around and they can't even help an old lady out."
mm, mm,
And he didn't know he didn't say all these Hare Krishnas. It's just like he could tell we're dedicated to some kind of religious path. We're so-called spiritual.
mm.
But then in the most obvious sense, we can't help people. So what help are we really offering in the existential sense?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah. In the name of dedication, we are neglecting individuals, basically. No? So I know it may sound heavy for some, but for me, that's a form of impersonalism. Again, going back to the topic of radical personalism, the topics all these different radicals we are sharing in these meetings are facets of this same principle of remaining a person and remaining personal to others. So again, not taking care of others is a form of not acknowledging their existence, basically, as you mentioned. Is subtly saying to others, you are not a person, you do not exist,
Exactly.
and somehow sabotaging your own project, because if you do not take care of others, how you will again pray for mercy and pray Krishna, Guru, Vaishnavas, please take care of me, if we are not extending that same gift to others. So So that recalls me once. I think Prabhupada was on the rooftop with some devotees in India. There was some beggar walking, and one of the devotees was in a similar situation to Deva Madhava, and he asked somehow, and he told Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, when I see these people, sometimes I feel sorry. No, the implication was like, I know I shouldn't feel sorry because that's Maya and I should be transcendental and that's their karma. And he said, I sometimes feel sorry. And Prabhupada looked at him and say, why only sometimes? Mhm.
Mm,
A main quality of a devotee is kripalu. Generally, in the list of qualities of a devotee begins with the devotee is merciful.
mm,
So I love to connect this idea of taking care of other people in connection to the quality of compassion and of mercy. Again, we say one of the four regulative principles is don't eat meat, but actually the actual principle is be merciful, be compassionate. So I will say if you don't take care of others, you are breaking that regulative principle basically. Or in this case, today's topic, if you put the interest of the institution, so to say, or if you conceive institution as separate of its members, and in the name of institution you neglect individual beings, that's breaking the regulative principle of compassion by extension.
mm.
Hmm.
Excellent point. And the deification of the institution is so
Hmm.
easy
Hmm.
because it's so felt. It's so easy to watch the institution grow and to by metrics an institution to be able to feel successful and accomplished. It's much more difficult to feel successful and accomplished in the context of relationships.
Mhm,
How many
mhm,
points, how much money, how much square footage have I gained in a relationship today? It's hard to measure that. It's not very tangible, even
mhm,
for so-called emotionally sensitive people. But
mhm.
the institution provides this easy win of sorts to anchor and hang my hat on, and it creates this temptation, to your point, of just basically neglecting the well-being of individuals in the name of all these much more measurable metrics.
Yeah, totally agree. I remember once this idea came. You mentioned the point of relationships and the importance of growing in them, and the idea came. Yeah, one of the main services we have to perform to our guru, to Sri Krishna, to the Vaishnavas, having good relationships. We generally do not see that as seva. Seva, many times we see it like doing stuff, no, like doing things or constructing something, donating. But what about developing our relationships? That's an offering unto itself. That's one of
Mm,
the main offerings. So, but generally we do not conceive of relationships as a service opportunity. Of course, it's much more, as you mentioned, much more complicated, much more elusive. I mean, probably you won't receive a yearly prize for developing your relationship. That should be there, but many times the acknowledgement is more for, okay, he gave this donation, he did that in numbers. As you mentioned, the metric is different. And I think it's very necessary to develop a more subtle way of measuring, so to say, things like in another direction. The other day we were talking that sometimes the voters may measure falling down, going in another direction, like, okay, he broke one of the four regs or something. But sometimes if you are indulging in dualistic thinking, hypocrisy, envy, or more subtle things, those are not considered like such a scandal, so to say, although there may be even more delicate, but they are more subtle and invisible, and generally we don't think in those terms. We measure only for the externals in one sense. So yeah, I think it's in one way or another, it's an invitation for grasping things in a more, entering more into an invisible space where things are more and more refined and need to be considered from that perspective. Yeah. Hmm.
So I wonder, Maharaj, what, because I feel like a lot of the ills of bad institution are felt and understood by people these days. There's less clarity on what could be improved or what would the alternative um, look like structurally, because I think that that piece is important. um, People know what they want to have, but they don't know how to get it necessarily. So maybe we could orient the conversation some in that direction about some of the actual adjustments to make within an institution
Hmm.
to create the experience of connection and upliftment and support that everybody kind of intuitively understands is actually supposed to be going on.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, I will, in that connection, thanks for the invitation. Um, Russ is mentioning that I'm sure that I connected to the correct Wi-Fi. My correct connection is not so good, but yeah, Russ, I'm connected to the correct Wi-Fi here. Goranga 5G. So I think if Mahaprabhu is present there, he's he's sharing the 5G. Maybe that's a Panchatattva, the 5G. He says, please leave and rejoin. That may be too much. It's so bad. That's such a bad connection we have now.
You're
Can you see me and hear me properly?
you
Deva
are
Madhava?
blurry, Marash. I think the audio's on time, but the image is a little slow and you're a little blurry.
Hmm. Hmm. Let's try for a few minutes more and let's see if it continues working. So I will start the invitation you made by clarifying a little bit what's the role of institutions, because
Mm,
many times we tend to confuse many things, or without bad intention, of course. Like yesterday, I saw that someone asked you in your conference and a question, and in that connection, he was mentioning, like, speaking about institutions are and sadhu sangha as synonymous almost. And you made that point, like that's not necessarily the same.
mm.
I mean, and sometimes we kind of do this type of sayuja, this merging, this conceptual merging, and we use words. Again, we may say they are just words, but they are not just words necessarily. Sometimes we use words and they create an idea in us, and that idea creates our whole orientation and conception to what is what. So if we can merge, like, I don't know, institution with sadhu sangha, then the message is, without an institution you cannot have sadhu sangha. And maybe for you, institution might be, for that person, big building, big structure. Well, interestingly, if you pay attention, the institutional framework of Gaudiya Vaishnavism basically began with Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur in one sense. Before that, if you asked Bhaktivinoda Thakur, which mission do you belong to, he wouldn't have an answer to say because there were no institutions. He may reply in terms of Parivar or Gaudiya Sampradaya, but not institution per se. And of course, I'm not saying it's time to burn out all the churches, and the only church that enlightens is the one who is burning on flames, like some people say. So I'm not like anti-institution, but it's important to delineate the reach and the ups and downs of institutions. So institution, basically, I compare them in my book with cups, no, like cups. So the point is, you can drink milk directly from a cow. Now it's possible, but generally a cup will facilitate the delivery, so to say. A cup will allow you to drink it more specifically. So the idea is the transcendental substance that does not depend on an institution for its transmission, but institutions can help, can often assist that delivery. But at the same time, we have to understand the transcendental substance is so vast, so unlimited, that no institution can fully encompass and contain and deliver the totality of it. So also we should be careful not to over absolutize the institution to the point of thinking, I don't know, that it has become more than what it is. No, so some just initial point to share, but you please
Yeah,
continue.
it's so important how you frame that. What to understand what is the value or purpose of the institution, that contextualizes it because it implies there's also things that the institution can't or shouldn't do.
Mm-hmm.
So if there are things it should do, there's also things it shouldn't do. And I'm reminded of this verse, which is often misapplied, at least from the sentimental side, from the Bhagavatam, that one should not become a parent, a teacher, unless they can deliver their dependence. You shouldn't be a
Mm-hmm.
guru, a teacher, or a parent unless you're a pure devotee. That's how it's
Mm-hmm.
taken in our society. I shouldn't have children unless I'm already a pure devotee, which doesn't do well for sociology nor spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
To have that misunderstanding, but that's how it's received, is that I have to be the one to deliver my child. But the real implication is that you just have to be a good parent.
Mm-hmm.
You have to play your part within the equation of that child's life. And then when they meet the spiritual master, when they meet the sadhu, they'll have already had the foundational experience of a good parent, and they will be able to then take that step forward into healthy sadhu sangha. But if you try to be a sadhu for your child and
Mm-hmm.
and then ignore your duties as a parent, then when the child meets the sadhu, they're not able to relate to them in the healthy way and
Mm-hmm.
receive what can be received there. So to understand what the institution is for implies also what it is for not, and allows devotees to start looking in other places to, or in other ways we could say, to find those things that they will not get from an institution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Totally agree. So yeah, I agree, and I think it's important to be sobered about the ups and the downs. Sometimes we choose, as I mentioned also in my book, sometimes we concentrate on our own tradition and maybe we focus on the glories of it, which is beautiful, but only the glories and never analyzing any of the downsides is a little part. And we go to downsides of other traditions, of course, and the
Happily.
glories of ours. Sorry, one.
Happily.
Yeah, of course, celebrating that comparison, so to say, and we get a totally distorted picture. And in that context, sometimes we end up again over absolutizing the function and the reach of the institution, and we like develop over expectations about our own membership or the membership of other people's in the institution itself, because we already like overexpanded our own sense of what institution means. So on that overexpanded sense of what institution actually is, you further project over expectations of those who join that over expected institution. So as you mentioned, someone joins the institution and you already have in your mind an overextended sense of what that person should be doing, how they must should surrender, because the institution is such a thing, which actually is not that. And we are kind of again doing another type of uh, illegal sayuja, illegal merging between again the essence that the institution is expected to facilitate and extend, and we consider the cup to be the milk, so to say. The institution have merged and became the essence, and there's no difference between the two. Well, actually, there is. There is. Srila Prabhupada himself, that I recall when he, I mean, I know that some devotees will compare ISKCON Prabhupada's institution, so to say, to something non-different from him and spiritual and transcendental. And there's a way to talk about that, but also there's a way to talk about ISKCON in institutional terms and a structure, or ISKCON as a state of consciousness and inner mood. So again, we need to separate these two. And I recall when Srila Prabhupada was founding ISKCON and writing all these legal papers, this was shared by Achyutananda Swami at that time, Achyutananda Das.
Mm.
And he said that Prabhupada, in the midst of writing all these laws and papers and rules, he said that actually at the end of the day, it all boils down that the rules for ISKCON are that the society should be ruled by love and trust. And if at some point this main rule is not followed, all the effort that we made to create this institution, we had to make that same effort to dismantle that institution because it no longer serves that purpose.
Mm.
So Prabhupada himself expressed that, like considering there is place for creating and dismantling an institution, but the essence of that, the essence of ISKCON, so to say, is this love and trust. Whether it's called ISKCON takes one form, takes another. So the point is, we should be clear about discerning about the difference between, again, form and essence, principle and details, and so on.
We have a few comments here. Devotees are asking, what is care?
Oh, let me share one of them. Let's see.
What is the structure there? And
let's see. Here's one from Virinda Sundar in that connection. Yeah, it seems important to clarify what exactly it means to care for someone. So what does it mean, Deva Madhava? Let me know your version of it.
well, I'd like to speak to the institution's role of that, since that's kind of where my mind went, since that's where our conversation is. I'm reminded, there's a political philosopher named John Locke. He's in America. We have the founding fathers, who are like the politicians that set the country up. But they were all influenced by brahmanas. They're kind of the kshatriya class, more or less. They were influenced by philosophers the founding philosophers.
Mm-hmm.
And one of them is John Locke, and John Locke writes about natural law and natural rights.
Mm-hmm.
And natural law we can equate to dharma, that
Mm-hmm.
every individual in the society has some responsibility to contribute to it. And then natural rights are those things which are natural for one to receive from the society.
Mm-hmm.
And John Locke writes, I'm obviously making things very brief in a summary. He writes that essentially those societies which are able to productively emphasize natural law, basically those societies which the preponderance of influence is towards your responsibility,
Mm.
those are the healthier societies.
Mm.
And your natural rights will then naturally be provided because everybody's looking to provide something. So when
Mm.
everyone's looking to provide something, then everyone is provided for in a kind of natural way. Whereas when things become too concerned with what I can get, my
Mm.
natural rights and my natural dharma or law becomes neglected, that's when things become depressed and anxious. So, despite the devotional community's um, irresponsible neglect of people's needs over the last 40 years or so, it's still, I feel, and we've been able to do this on some level at the Harmony Collective, it's still important to maintain that momentum towards personal responsibility within the society. And that is what I understand to be real care, is to help someone enter into a position of responsibility where they can feel the value of their own existence in contributing to the existence of others, ultimately the supreme other, as you began beautifully pointing out, Maharaj, Radha Krishna. They will
Mm.
need us forever. And so to feel needed and to know how I can contribute in the immediate
Mm.
someone else, that's really what a community helps me to get to. And yes, of course, some people in the beginning are so deficient and kind of harassed that they may need a kind of intensive care period where a lot is being given to them without much coming back.
Mm.
But the eventual goal is that.
Mm. Thank you for sharing. I totally appreciate your emphasis on care as responsibility, and not only I'm taking responsibility for you, so I'm taking care of you, but I'm taking responsibility for you implies I'm inviting you to take responsibility for you.
Yes.
No, because sometimes in the name of taking care, we may be also promoting a notion of just like flattery or like kijai or like
Codependency.
codependency, but not healthy responsibility, as I like to divide the word responsibility. No, to teach people to develop the ability to respond to life, basically to life, to bhakti, to Krishna's will. And that takes time, because sometimes in the name of take care, I'm not being taken care of, you should take care. Sometimes also that can be a form of exploitation. No, the care I'm requesting may
Mm.
not be care at all. I don't want to be taught responsibility. I don't want to be taught to take responsibility for myself and to change what I need to change in order to be more responsible. I just want to be taken care of. And who knows what do you understand in that case for being taken care of, just being provided, as you mentioned. And as you mentioned, there's a place for that in certain stages, maybe baby stages, like a baby is just provided, but the parent has the hope of, okay, at one point he will not become a monster and will keep requesting and demanding more and more and more, but will be able to reciprocate accordingly. So yeah, you will go, yeah, please.
I'm just thinking back to my first marriage, and I had this
Mm.
ill-conceived notion that from day one it should just be a total giving to the movement, a total giving to others,
Mm.
and there was a lack of investment internally. There was a lack of care, and that caused the thing to break up very quickly. And in retrospect and looking back and figuring out how to do things better, if there would be a
Mm.
second time around, which now there is, and so
Mhm.
what to do better and differently, I recognize that there's this odd paradigm in our movement of trying, you get a new couple and you pump them
Mm.
up with an idea that they're kind of a, like a God destined service engine of force and purity, and they're going to save the lives of so many. And then
mm,
you squeeze out from them for 2 or 3 years all they can give, but then they fizzle and die.
mm,
You got 2 or 3 years out of them, but it's 2 or 3 very immature, awkward years anyway. They didn't really have much to give. They weren't mature yet. They weren't
mm,
offering sweet fruit.
mm,
And now the tree's dead. But conversely, like in Jewish society, in traditional, the honeymoon period is actually, it's a year. There's a period where it's considered, one of
mm,
a friend, Lokaram Prabhu, was sharing this with me, because he married, his wife is kind of not exactly Orthodox Jew, but more traditional. And it's a year where the community basically doesn't ask anything of those young people, and
oh,
instead just encourages them to spend time with each other. And they're provided for, and the young man doesn't have to work as much.
mm,
And it's understood that when so much is given in the beginning, then later on they will be able to give to the next young couple, because
mhm,
they'll be mature, they'll be healthy, they'll be settled in each other, and there'll be prosperity and wealth from a material, subtle, social, emotional level that comes from that. Something like a baby who gets breastfed
mhm,
versus one who's on the bottle from the beginning. Many studies have shown now that later on in life, no matter whether the person is in a relatively comfortable situation or not, the one who was breastfed is healthier by
mhm,
disposition, and the one who is fed from the bottle is generally, whether things are nice or not, has a harder time maintaining their health. So there's, for many people, when they first come in their enthusiasm, we yoke them up to the movement and extract a couple years of book distribution or pot washing or whatever out of them. They're their least productive years. That's all we get. And then they go away, and they're disillusioned. And if they maintain their Krishna consciousness at all, they're not so interested in maintaining any proximity to the actual movement, because
mhm,
of that difficult experience, that lack of care in the beginning. Whereas ironically, if just a 2 or 3 year period of care had been given, then they'd give 2, 3, 4 decades happily after
mm,
that.
mm, mm. Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Uh, yeah, let's not like exploit the utsahamai, so to say. No, you are in the honeymoon period, super inspired, and give, and the moment you start. And I've seen that, and I've heard many devotees throughout the years. Like feeling sometimes disappointed, disillusioned by feeling okay. I've given so much the first years, and eventually, for whatever reason, I don't know. Also, I was willing to give more, but eventually, I don't know. I got married. I have another responsibilities, and the focus shifted from to those who are in their own yutsahama, in their own initial enthusiasm, and provide. So I was made felt like I was just temporary tool for fulfilling some purpose, but at the moment I'm not being able to provide as I would like. I feel like put away. No, or some devotees telling me that day, I was talking with some like, yeah, here in the community the main emphasis in those who give the donations and who provide, no matter what's their behavior. So that's the thing. No, if you have good behavior but do not provide, you are not that important. But if you provide in terms of monetary contribution, we don't care for what you are doing outside of the donation itself. So that will be the main thing.
Mm,
And I will think, I mentioned that I think in my book, the importance of trying to care about individuals, and especially those who won't benefit us in any immediate form. No, that's a real exhibition of care. I mean, I'm serving you, I'm taking care of you, and as you mentioned, I'm not receiving anything from you in the immediate, in immediacy. Instead of serving, quote unquote, serving those who, no matter how they behave, are the ones who are contributing to our own separate cause, actually, not the actual cause.
mm,
There's one comment here from Michelle that I like to share. She says, okay, but that idea of people taking responsibility often gets translated into using devotees to serve the institution. Yeah, that's why I mentioned in the beginning, we need to reframe, not only find new words, but go to the glossary and give the proper meaning to each word, because the same word gets translated into so many ways. So and may continue to be so, unfortunately. But we need to be clear about what does it mean, what does it, which are the implications of the terms. Then she said, there is pressure on devotees to show they are responsible by doing seva for the temple. Once busy doing service, my experience has been that becomes the marker of spiritual progress. Any thoughts, Deva Madhava, on that one?
Yeah, it's been a very awkward experience for me to recognize that dynamic as ultimately an institutional manager of a temple. That expectation that I have, that now that I've given so much to a person, there ought to be something coming back for the organization in a kind of formal, straightforward sense. And I've had to, in some ways personally, and in some ways it's been shown to me that that expectation gets in the way of the real experience that the person may be able to have. That for some people, the best place is more or less disconnected from the institutional operation. And there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't, it's not a mark on their Krishna consciousness. It's natural for them to just uh, be and serve and develop and grow in a different sphere away from formal things. It's a Pandora's box. And when I get too tempted to look at other um, operations, other yatras, and criticize them for not creating more of this atmosphere that we're discussing, I understand why they don't want to open that Pandora's box also. Because as soon as you start providing what people need, you come to see how deficient they are. As soon as you take away those kind of pretenses that people are operating on, that I show up at the right time, on the right day, wearing the right clothes, saying the right words. And if you say that's what it means to be a good devotee, then I'll agree and we'll all be okay. We'll just keep the peace. As soon as you remove those pretenses, behind that is a whole blockage of toxicity and putrefaction that has to come out. And then behind that is all the work that they had to do anyway. Before
Deva Madhava knows what he's talking about. He speaks, he's walking the talk, so pay attention to him, guys.
before you even the stuff that anyway was problematic and going to be difficult to work through. First, you have to work through all the stuff that built up because of your poor schematics. Then you have to work through the stuff that anyway the conditioned soul is going to have to deal with. And everyone's looking to you or the few of you who are kind of leading the effort to create that for them. They don't have parents. They don't have mentors and guides and healthy relationships in their life because they're Kali Yuga creatures. And it's an overwhelming experience for anybody that takes it on with any responsibility. What I have 30, 40, 50 people in my community. I look at the people who have 400 persons connected to a temple, and I understand why individually they may deal in one way and collectively they deal another, because the overwhelming scenario that they face is just that. It's like oppressive, and nobody else is doing it. So why should I have to get into that mess with people? Of course, when you do, there's so much reciprocation. You realize this is what it's about. This is what we have to do one day or another. So why not start? But starting, that entry price is very high.
I totally agree. I appreciate your realism and bringing down to earth, because again, it's easy to talk about the things and to demand or to say, I don't know, they are failing, this should be done like this, like that. But really, you have to enter into the arena and taste the blood, sweat, and tears that are going on in terms of what it takes to create community, to sustain community, to actually relate to one another. I mean, it's easier said than done. I mean, I've been temple president for probably 15 years in a row, and that's beautiful, but that's completely demanding and challenging and complex. One idea that comes to mind, going back to your invitation to talk about the role of institutions and so on, in connection to what you mentioned, the idea came recently, like institutions, ideally, the purpose of the institution, in connection to what you just mentioned, at least one of the purposes, I'm not boiling down to one, but one of them will be like to create a safe container for the individuals to express their vulnerability, so to say, to create safe space, for the members of the community, I like to speak more in terms of community than in institution. The institutional side may be there, but we are mostly concerned about being community, being family. And sometimes it's as easy as it sounds, we forget that we are family basically, and we may get like, I don't know, we may be construct an institution with ideas, but ideas without a heart sometimes. No? So it's important to keep this idea we are family. And this idea came once like, okay, the role, actual purpose of institution is create sacred space or safe container so each of its members feel the invited and safe to express their vulnerability. What do you think in that connection?
I think it's a wonderful point, and it speaks. It's I think a nice answer to this observation that Yoga Maya is making in the chat. She's saying we can't even care for our older generation. What to speak of the younger ones? These devotees have given their whole lives, as though we, in any direction you look, you see people deficient in what they're being provided. No one's been provided for yet. So then where does the growth begin? Where do we address things first? It first just begins by admitting that, by coming together and being vulnerable and admitting this very high ideal of Gaudiya Vaishnavism is not being met by this very wonderful yet deficient effort that's been made so far. There's the word devotee care has become a very popular mantra in ISKCON. And I wrote an essay some time ago that the very need to put devotee care as a kind of separate department within a temple's effort is a sign that the temple's effort, the community's effort, is itself misguided. Krishna consciousness and devotee care are synonyms, right? Jiva Doya, Krishna Nam, Vaishnav Seva. Or what is it? Jiva Doya.
Vadai Krishnanam Sarva Dharma Sar.
No, Jiva Doya. Nam Ruchi, Vaishnav Seva.
Okay.
These things are synonymous. Serving the Vaishnavas, being kind to those who don't have that momentum in their life yet, and Nam Ruchi all go together. They're not separate departments, separate experiences. And so this idea of caring for devotees as being some effort outside of my Krishna consciousness is itself a misconception. And to just admit that we've all allowed ourselves to be duped on some level. We've all contributed from my own salvationist hopes that just by being a member of this institution, I don't have to do anything. I can just say my pledge of allegiance and I'll get all of the opportunity of Goloka Vrindavan without having to do any of the effort, all the way to the folks at the top who inculcate that mentality in the followers, because then they don't have to do much effort except stay in and do what I say. And then your certificate will be signed at the end. From top to bottom, there's been this temptation into our lower nature. And to be vulnerable enough to admit that to each other is the beginning of then seeing in a practical way, what can we start doing and who can start doing it to be able to create in generations from now the ideal that we understand, because that's also the other, like what is possible in the next decade, 4 decades, versus what might my grandchildren's grandchildren be doing if I do my part now.
Yeah, totally resonate. And that reminds me so much, many things that I've written in radical personalism, in terms that many parts of the book are hopefully a healthy criticism to the current stage of our community, and trying to speak about, okay, anticipatory Gaudiya Vaishnavism, proactive devotion, but not in terms of let's change everything in this present generation. Like you mentioned, it's not possible. And probably the Dharma, so to say, or our Dharma, our duty in this particular generation or chapter is to be vulnerable enough, as you mentioned, to get humiliated, so to say, and realize the things that we are failing at. And that's enough dose for that particular generation, probably. No? Yeah, because we want to go through that chapter quickly. Okay, let's make a weekend retreat to pray about our mistakes, and next week we are shining brightly and everything is empowered again. But maybe no, you need this lifetime to go through that tunnel. And that's the duty, the dharma of your generation, to just reflect, be introspective, be held in a healthy way, humiliated, and
Mm.
develop proper humility from that, and acknowledge the shortcomings and learn from the past and project a healthy future. So I totally agree with that, because sometimes we are accustomed to wanting things immediately and see changes quickly, and it's not comfortable at all. Okay, I will enter that. I will work, do my shadow work, and in this particular generation, I realized that my duty is to be vulnerable for a few decades, and it's like, oh no, no, I don't want to do that so long. Uh, but I think it's totally healthy to, yeah, to be able to ascertain. Well, maybe that's the duty of our generation. No? To
Exactly.
enter into that period of healthy repentance for a few decades and reflection and introspection. Of course, not doing anything, but if you don't go deep enough into those places, you won't be able to create a very substantial, comprehensive change for the future to come.
The imagery for me around this
Mm.
idea always, because we're in Detroit, so Detroit is, for better or worse, gave the world the gift of the assembly line. And
What's
putting
the assembly line? Sorry.
assembly line is in a factory. There's this
Mm,
conveyor belt, and Henry Ford
mm,
intuited that cars could be built quicker
mm,
if they weren't one individual building a whole car,
mm,
but one individual just putting one part on the car, and
mm,
then the car moves down the line, and the next guy does this, and
mm,
you just do the same thing all day. It's more
mm.
efficient.
Okay.
It's mind numbing, of course, so we'll put that part aside.
Yeah.
Where are we on the assembly line of Mahaprabhu's movement
Mm,
and Leela, and this burgeoning of Gaudiya Vaishnavism and the Hare Krishna Mahamantra manifesting within this realm? Where am I on that assembly line? I might want to put the steering wheel on, because
mm,
that's like the exciting thing to do. The car is
mm,
ready, and this, the most prompt, the deity of the car, the steering wheel. I want to be the one to put that there.
mm,
But we haven't even built the frame yet.
mm.
It doesn't even quite look like a car yet, and we're already trying to drive the thing. We're already trying to put the steering wheel.
And
We're not.
honk, play the honk on other people, like ding, 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 ding.
So
Yeah.
my part might just be this very humble rivet that no one's ever going to see.
Mm,
Once the rest of the car is assembled, you won't even see the part that I put there.
mm,
But God will have,
mm,
Guru will have,
mm,
and if I learn to take satisfaction in that, I've actually become humble in the way that we're entreated to, not the humility that I can parade around and show off to others.
mm, mm. Beautiful. Yeah, that reminds me of once. I think Radha and Maharaj say that, but I'm not sure if it's his quote or he quoted from someone else. Like the Vaishnavas are like salt, that the salt is what gives taste to everything, but nobody will glorify the salt. No, nobody will say, "Oh, salt was perfect, so beautiful." You will glorify all the spices, every ingredient except for the salt. But without salt, everyone will protest and nobody will eat anything. So I appreciate your point in that terms of invisible. Actual humility will if you are expert in humility, that will play out in very invisible ways. But that invisible thread is sustaining the whole structure, as you're mentioning. So yeah, I think that's a highlight that you brought up, this idea of probably identifying the duty of our particular generation with proper grieving, so to say, and mourning and reflecting, not in the depressed way, not in a tamasic sense like laziness and so on,
Mm.
but really going deep into what we can learn from the past and project the future properly and acknowledge what's our present stance what do we understand by institution, even like going back to a basic, like asking ourselves, of course, to begin with, okay, what's ISKCON for me, what's an institution for me, what's Gaudiya Math from whatever mission, and see what comes from those basic questions and see how much those replies match actual reality, so to say,
Mm.
and where we are standing in our own idea of things. I remember once you told me in connection to your situation, there's ISKCON and there is my ISKCON. No? You told me, and I asked you, and do I belong to your ISKCON? And you told me, of course, Maharaj. So I was like, okay. If someone complains that I'm in an ISKCON center talking, I belong to it's some form of ISKCON, just in case you can ask Deva Madhava. But yeah, this idea of mission, no, this a mission. That what's a mission? No, sometimes we use the word mission as synonymous with institution, but also mission has more to do with an internal mission. I have my life's mission. And a mission in terms of institution has to be just a natural organic extension of a life's mission, like Prabhupada. Prabhupada inaugurated ISKCON, but that was his life mission, and that took the form of a mission in terms of institution. But we have to always bear the connection with internal mission, always an internal sense of these words: institution, mission, or movement. No, I like this idea of movement. I put it in my book, like, okay, we have a movement, this movement, that movement, but every external movement, it begins with some internal movement. Something has to be moving inside of me. Like Mahaprabhu, so much was moving inside of him, and eventually that inner movement took external shape in the form of an external organized movement. But it all began with internal movement of his heart. No, so how much there is movement internally, and that has to be naturally reflected in the external platform. So I don't know what you think in those connections.
That's wonderful. I I woke up one morning, Maharaj, you love, like, you're so good at wordplay. I'm always so impressed by
That's my way of learning English somehow.
I know it's amazing to me that you're a non-English speaker. It's almost like, the outsider's perspective gives you this very uh, brilliant way to be able to play with the language. So I woke up one morning and I was just feeling so heavy and riled up, and it just like came to me like a mantra. Am I in a movement, or am I a part of a monument? Am I just looking to the past and trying to glorify some historical period, or am I part of something living and breathing? And so this was at the stage of my life where I was happy to take to Facebook with whatever I think would rile people up. And so I went on Facebook and I make my post, movement or monument. And literally, Marsh, the next, it was, Krishna right there. I start my customary scroll of my own feed. The very first post is a monument of Srila Prabhupada being established in one temple here in North America to note a significant moment in the history of our community. I won't get more specific than that. And I immediately took my post down because I didn't want people to think that I was exactly speaking to that.
Yeah.
However, I was exactly speaking to that there's all this Hari Bol about what happened, and there's all this unwillingness to discuss, admit, and move forward for what could happen, what has happened that shouldn't have happened, what could happen or could happen going forward. So we were with Tamal Krishna and Jai and other friends a few days ago in a sangha that Tamal was holding around Chaturmasya. And I was sharing that the goal that at Harmony Collective, the community, I've been saying now for several years that our goal is to just stay together for 40 years. It's not been done yet, at least here in the West. And if a group of people just stick it out with tolerate each other in a cooperative, friendly way for 40 years, that is our offering to the future generations. And they can worry about self-sufficiency and all ahimsa milk and only our own veggies and, all the other romances of communal living and development and support that the devotee community rightly in some ways heralds. First, we just have to learn to stick by each other, trust each other, give each other the benefit of the doubt for 40 years. And then our children's children can think about ahimsa ice cream.
Okay. Yeah. Because we have to show another forms of ahimsa. I think Deva Madhava froze, or he became in stamba. He enters some ecstatic paralyzing after making the ahimsa ice cream. Maybe that's enough invocation to remain there. So just for him to let's wait if he can return or not. But I will share a few words. Meanwhile, let me tell him that he froze. Let's see. Anyhow, Deva Madhava is mentioning, meanwhile, he tries to reconnect or unfroze. the idea of our movement as living. No, the very word movement implies movement. No, something that is moving, something that is in constant unfolding, constant, and the movement of reality is ever unfolding, is evolutionary. So it's always becoming something more. It's not stuck in history. It's not, as he said, a monument. It's not a museum like piece, so to say, but something that is constantly unfolding, evolving, dancing. Ultimately, for us, ultimate reality. There he is again. The ultimate reality is dance. No, for our Gaudiya tradition, the ultimate reality is a movement, is a dancing. So the word movement is very crucial for us. And I was saying just the Madhava, I appreciate your point of light went off.
But now I'm on my phone, so it won't cut the Wi-Fi.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, I'll try and increase my my laptop's brightness.
Okay, thank you so much. We see the example of Deva Madhava being willing to enter, inhabiting the darkness and being willing to go outside of comfort zone, delving into the unknown. But yeah, I like to define in my book. I define Sampradaya as a living school of prophets, basically. Like something really dynamic, really alive, full of aliveness. The very idea of Sampradaya implies that movement, aliveness, the ultimate dance. I mean, our movement has to match. Again, as we mentioned before, Mahaprabhu's movement began with something that was moving so deeply in him that made him to dance, to move. No? And that dancing represents basically the dynamics of the movement, and we should be not only dancing externally. Okay, we are following Mahaprabhu's example, but what's moving inside of me, what's dancing inside of me, and how we can make that sustainable. As Deva Madhava mentioned, I really appreciated that also. The point of sustainability. Okay, we are speaking on sustainability in communities, but first let's make our own relationship sustainable. And it's not a weekend, as you mentioned. 40 years period is a good amount of time. No? Like I remember when I was like 20 years old, and my first guru was already like hinting at me to accept sannyas. No? So I was pretty young, I must accept. 20 years, gosh. So so I talked with a sannyasi friend of mine at that time, was again like in 2001 or something, and he told me wait for a decade to see if you still think about that, if you still have that same take on that. So I like the challenge. Okay, he didn't tell me, okay, think about it for a few months and decide. He told me, think about it for 10 years and we can talk about it again. And I really appreciated that advice, and I took that to heart. So I waited for those 10 years, and after that, say, yeah, I'm still there. Of course, I'm a totally different person, and now I'm from a different place, still there, but from a totally different perspective. That I appreciate having waited those 10 years. So yeah, I totally agree with this idea of trying to make sustainable and check the sustainability in some realistic period. It's not let's see how the relationship works in a few years, but let's give 4 decades. And that's not only an offering to the community, which of course it is, but it's also a very powerful testament, a very powerful testimony of this works. No, I mean, and realistically, because in those 40 years, I'm sure there were so many ups and downs. It's not like for 40 years everything was floating on a cloud and rainbow was accompanying us and every single day. No, there was lots of struggles and stuffs. And I think we as community and we as individuals need a lot of this more testimonies of long-term community and relationship with all its ups and downs, and not just like a over idealistic story and an overdose of romanticism, so to say, in how things have been. Return, tell us something from the darkness and the depth of the darkness.
Yeah, let's see the next attempt that Krishna makes to stop me from talking. How my phone might shut down. You're just reminding me, Maharaj, a play on words that I like is that we've mistaken transience for transcendence in our communities. And this attempt to emulate the Parivrajikacharya, Srila Prabhupada and others who had the capacity to, in a healthy way, not stay in one place for more than 2 weeks, 2 months, has crippled our communities. And still today, even within our community, I mean, I feel guilty all the time. I was just in Toronto. I'll be going to Gitanagri. All the time, I say no to travel. Still, I travel a lot. And every time I leave, I feel like a tree that's like pulling out its own root. That there's some root there that I'm like removing. And you only have so many roots as a tree, and you can't transplant a tree every 2 or 3 years and expect it to bear fruit. So the yagya of community begins with staying in one place. And wherever you go, there you are. The challenges are not unique or different. The weather might be a little different, but the challenges are not going to be unique or different. Your anartas and the discomfort and anartas of others are going to vomit forth. And you either balk and run and go to another place where you can pretend for 2 or 3 years that you're a pure devotee and so is everybody else until it all starts again and then leave again. Or you can buckle down, push through it, hold tight to those that you find you can trust, and transform, really transcend by staying rooted in one spot and growing vertically up and out of the fog, the bush of our relative conditioned existence.
Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I wanted to emphasize in this connection because, again, sometimes we, even if we move from institution to the sense of the word community or movement or whatever, also to emphasize that community doesn't necessarily mean a massive gathering of people and then only then you have your community, but just find a few ones in the flock that you resonate with, that you are what Rupa Goswami will call swajatiya, like like-minded or like-hearted, heart-minded, whatever. Swajatiya sangha, like even 1, 2, or 3 more, like the Bible will say, when 2 or 3 gather in my name, there I am. God himself is saying that. So they're the sweet absolute manifest, and we have created community. So I think it's important also to make that clear, to establish that new, or not new, but sense of togetherness. I mean, like it's more than enough if we are able to find a few kindred spirits, and they may happen not to be in the same institution I'm serving also. No, that's an important point. But we can, I mean, in the spiritual world, there won't be institutions. Let's be honest. No, there will be intimate groups of service. No, intimate groups of kindred spirits, different flocks of birds of the same feather, basically. So I think it's important. Like, although we are not there, so to say, somehow our present dynamics as sadhakas resemble more and more the eternal dynamics, so to say. That's the way that you start to participate in the spiritual world, literally. Like your life resembles more and more what's going on in eternity. So in eternity, there will be groups, but those won't be hard institutions, so to say, if we want to use that expression. Like you can speak about soft institutions and hard institutions, so to say. So I like to emphasize that point of community, you ultimately as finding community, whatever that manifests, even if it happens to be in another Gaudiya group or even in another mystical tradition. I mean, I have connection with people from mystical Christianity or other schools, and in many things I resonate more with them than I resonate with some Gaudiya Vaishnavas, I must confess. Although we may have a different Sambandha, Abhidheya, and Prayojan in many senses, but it doesn't do away with the fact that you can really resonate with these people, and I'm duly consider them devotees, if you will. I don't like the term non-devotees, just in case. What do you
Neither
think?
do I. Neither do I. I appreciate that, Maharaj. I'm a little prejudiced being in the trenches of a more traditional community, so to speak. That often when I speak to community, it does come to the normal, you could say, traditional sense of it. But I think it's really important for our actual prayojana, what you just brought out, that community, in the sense that it serves a Gaudiya Vaishnava, any spiritualist generally, but then especially our goal as Gaudiyas community is something that can be very fluid in the sense that all other traditional elements may not be there, but if that mutual sharing of internal purpose is present, then your deep, your family members and beyond,
Hmm.
even if proximity or organizational institutional connection are not there. So that's a very important point, and that's a challenge again for anybody who's a kind of leader of a community, is how to accommodate those different needs, because some people's needs are very on the ground and other people's needs are much more of the heart, and they've got the other stuff kind of figured out already. And the attempt of the institution, our Gaudiya institutions, to provide all the needs for all the people and the invitation that we'll be able to is a part of what's crippling us, I feel. If we go back to speaking about the larger organizational entities, the invitation that they make, that we'll figure out your family and we'll figure out your money and we'll figure out where you live and we'll figure out what you do every day, and we'll also figure out your eternal existential position. It's a tall order for even the most efficient, effective, well-organized, capable group. What to speak of what we're working with.
Yeah, and I think you commented that these days, or someone like, and also it may be scary in the sense of if the message, the narrative coming from the institution is we will figure every single detail of your life, that may be scary. I don't want that to be on that level. I mean, I want to keep my decision making capacity and still be an individual.
Exactly.
So I mean, in some stage, I understand that for some people that's a very charming prospect. Like, okay, they will tell me what to do, who to marry, where to work, how to live, how to think. I can understand it's alluring in some stage, it's charming, but eventually the very same institution or group or community has to push out our individuality. Let me share one message from Brinda Sundari that she just shared. It says, a quote from Brené Brown, an author that I really appreciate also. Leaders must either invest a reasonable amount of time attending to fears and feelings, or squander an unreasonable amount of time trying to manage ineffective and unproductive behavior. That's from Brené Brown. This is another way of actually caring that creates a better outcome overall, says Brinda Sundari.
That's wonderful. That's kind of what, in a more direct and poetic sense, what I was trying to bring out from that Bhagavatam verse that's often kind of sentimentally misspoken to, that to be a parent means to be a pure devotee. Rather than just to be a parent means to attend in a healthy way to the fears and concerns of your child so that when they become an adult, they're effective and responsible, rather than having to cope and still stuck in that child experience because they weren't provided what they needed when they were younger.
Yeah, and somehow it for me relates back to this point that I mentioned before, that the importance of an institution being, or a group community being, a vessel or a creation of sacred space to hold one's vulnerability, basically. Again, it's very uncomfortable to deal with vulnerability, because in order to deal with the vulnerability of another person, you have to be vulnerable yourself. I mean, you have to open yourself to empathize and enter into the world of the other person. And of course, the other person has to be open to allow that to happen. So in one sense, real vulnerability from one side requires real vulnerability from the other side to work. If I'm only vulnerable and you are not vulnerable, our exchange may end up in abuse, so to say. And that happens so many times in communities, in the dynamics of institutions, that we have one of the two sides of the equation being vulnerable, but the other side not corresponding, not honoring that vulnerability, not holding the space for that, and the result is disastrous many times. So that's for me another way of saying, okay, the individual is the heart of the institution. I mean, we have to take the care of the beating heart, and vulnerability means basically that, like rip off all the layers of non-heartedness and go straight to the naked heart. But for that, I have to show up with my naked heart as well, and not everyone wants to do that.
No. Well, that's what I noticed, Maharaj, about those who we find ourselves spending a lot of time with. There's a kind of underground railroad, as I call it, within the Gaudiya Vaishnav community of practically everywhere I go, there's devotees ready to have these conversations as soon as you kind of out yourself as someone who wants to.
Mm,
And the benefit of doing podcasts such as this is that you're just I'm carrying the scarlet letter now and admitting my want and my willingness to enter into these conversations. And
mm,
it's exciting because then everywhere I go, people want to reveal that part of themselves, and they want to help me enter in more deeply into it in my own
mm,
experience and having the conversation with them. So as much discussion as there is about what the institutions and particularly ISKCON could be doing better, because it's the big fish in the pond in the Gaudiya community right now,
mm,
I find that it's even more important for individuals who sense some lack in their spiritual life to actually take stock of what are my needs and where can they be fulfilled.
mhm,
Because as we've pointed out already, it's in many cases, it's probably not even appropriate in a healthy institution for the institution to be fulfilling things that we right now in our present conditioning expect the institution to fulfill.
mm,
So to remove those misconceptions and then find out what are the healthy channels for having that fulfilled, having that need met, is something that everybody can do today without having to worry about who your temple president is or what the GBC is doing or etc.
mm. Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. Let me share one word from Michelle. She's saying, and what can the volunteer expect from the temple? Temples need to be able to get to know the volunteer and see, too, how the volunteer needs to be served for the purpose of supporting their spiritual maturity. And she
Mm,
continues saying, but maybe this is the advantage of smaller sanghas. There is time, space, and energy for relationship, unlike a temple where the needs of the building and grounds demand most of the energy. Yeah, of course, here we are not criticizing big temples or just saying small communities are the only possible thing, but I will say even in a big community, you need smaller communities inside a big community so everything remains personalized. Because if
absolutely.
not, as I mentioned in my book, the bigger the crowd, the more negligible the individual becomes.
Mm,
So I'm not against big crowds, but the point is that's a danger. You have a bigger crowd. The individual figure starts to get lost into the collective, so to say, into the conglomerate. So everything has its up and down. So in those, I will say, in those big projects or big temples, some system of personalized care should be kept in place, so the needs of every person are present. And I appreciate, Michelle, what you mentioned in terms of uh, what how the volunteer needs to be served, because many times we
mm.
think, okay, volunteer is coming, he needs to serve. And we have the long list of what how we can engage him or her, but what are her necessities, his necessities, as how we can identify with the necessities of our newcomers, so to say. That's a very crucial layer, basically, to make whomever is coming really belong and really feel part of a family, basically. As you mentioned before, Deva Madhava, this first initial 1 year honeymoon period, so to say.
Mm.
No?
Yeah, I've been in discussion with several devotees now about the idea of a kind of detox for people when they first come to Krishna consciousness. You see this, it's a very sad dynamic that happens where Krishna consciousness becomes about my purification. And this is how it's presented to people. And so from day one,
Mm,
do a lot of service at the temple so that you can become purified. And
mm,
40 years forward, people are still trying to become purified instead of ever allowing themselves to experience the contact with Krishna that they're having and to cultivate that from the positive side, which is ultimately much more uplifting.
mm,
So this the way in which this presentation of how seva will save you actually co-ops the way that a sadhaka develops. And so
mhm,
there's a need that I've seen and others have seen that I've discussed with, to let people come in and not practice Krishna consciousness, but be a part of the bhakti sangha.
Mm-hmm.
And to understand that right now what you're doing is just becoming a normal human being in a basic sense. You're stabilizing your existence after being in the harassed material energy, and you can associate with the devotees, chant Hare Krishna, read the Bhagavatam, but understand that your real project in the beginning is just to create a stable position from which to do that meaningfully long term.
Mm-hmm.
And so that Michelle's very prescient comment got me thinking about that, how we see that naivety, that it's a codependence. People recognize their life as a mess, and we come in with the magic wand solution of devotional service, Krishna consciousness, and a temple that needs a lot of help. And so for 2-3 years, people live in that. But then afterwards, they start to recognize that their needs still aren't being met. And maybe they're being taken advantage of. And then they go elsewhere.
Totally agree with that. Totally agree with that also, Deva Madhava. And of course, I like to talk about that so much, about the need for our human grounding and foundation, and how much many times that's neglected in the name of transcendence. And like, if humanity is something that goes against transcendence, and like if our own idea of transcendence doesn't include humanity, which is a huge mistake, because our idea of transcendence is Nara Lila, and that's fully human and fully divine. So we have to be grounded in humanness to begin with. I appreciate your point also that you mentioned this emphasis on to be purified, to be purified, to be purified. Also, that sends the message, the light is back. Okay. So also that sends the message of
we made it through.
the tunnel is over. Just the first one. Then let's see the next one. But this emphasis on you have to be purified also sends the subtle message, or sometimes not even so subtle, that if you are not purified enough, Krishna doesn't love you, or you are not being accepted by God. So you need to deserve, you have to earn God's love by way of your purification. It's all upon you, basically. It's all on your shoulders, your effort, your sacrifice, some sort of meritocracy. No, the more you are purified, the more Krishna will like you. But like you are now, he doesn't like you that much. So you need to purify so much. And that creates an idea of Krishna, which is totally a-Krishna. No, it's not. That's not God. That's not the God I worship, at least. God of unconditional love and mercy. So I just want to make that point, although maybe a little bit on the side. But sometimes the overt emphasis of sheer purification, it does away with who Krishna is, and as you mentioned, with a positive sense of developing a loving relationship with him, because ultimately Krishna consciousness is about developing my relationship with God, period.
Yes.
It's not about getting rid of something, but positively advancing in certain direction. And sometimes that's missed totally, and we end up conceiving our practice in negative terms, basically in don'ts. Now, what not to do, what to get rid of, and I'm not against that, but that's just actually a byproduct of the positive culture, basically.
You revealed, Maharaj, that you in some ways prefer the sangha of others from other traditions who in some ways are more at heart with your own sense of purpose. And I feel the same. I'd rather there's a couple people from other communities who I'd rather spend my time with than some Hare Krishnas. And what you just said reminds me of what I appreciate spending time with good Christians, in the sense of Christians who feel like their association is uplifting for me. There's this sense of Sharanagati that they have, this sense of, I can't earn it. I can't get into heaven on merit, on works alone, as the Bible literally puts it. I'm just dependent on God's grace, on the grace of Christ in my life. And I can say thank you in a way by trying to emulate, but I'm never going to earn my way into the kingdom. And sometimes in Gaudiya Vaishnavism that gets muddled. Of course, on the Christian side, it becomes very lazy and languid. And many of us may have rejected our Judeo-Christian upbringing because of the laziness that mentality can foster. So it's also its own double-edged sword. But to your point, on the Gaudiya side, there's too much to do. And if I chant perfect rounds and wake up at the right time and wear the right clothes and say the right words and then do all the service with every breath and moment I have in between doing those things, then in 3 to 5 years, premi bhakta.
Yeah, totally agree. Uh, yeah, so much. I use the word meritocracy in my book so many times because I think that idea is on our own merit. It's up on our own merit, and that can be really at one point overwhelming because I mean we are really considerably limited in terms of it's up to me to earn my way into Golok. I mean that's discouraging basically. That attacks our own faith. We are not nourishing the faith by saying that. Of course, there is the danger that you mentioned of laziness, but of course the middle point is always the healthy one. So try to, since you mentioned the Bible, there's one quote I cannot recall literally, but say something like like God created so many rules so we may fail in them, so he has a further option to show his unconditional mercy to us. So I appreciated that. No, like God is so addicted to show mercy that he puts the mark very difficult so we can fail and he can give us love despite we don't deserve it. No, I felt charmed. Like again, I'm not feeling lazy by hearing that, but I'm feeling humbled by, oh my gosh, such a merciful, such a generous disposition is coming to us from Mahaprabhu. And so, I mean, I cannot but try to take as much responsibility as I can to correspond with that. So there are ways and ways to relate to these ideas of costless mercy and what's our role in connection to that in terms of, and I think this reflects in relation to what we are talking today, the dynamics of community. I mean, if you properly enter joining community and you are showered by tons of costless mercy, proper costless mercy, the message you will receive is naturally, I want to reciprocate with this. I want to be part of that. I want to belong to this place. No, it doesn't feel like any sort of forcing, fitting in, demanding, but so much generosity that it's moving my heart to the point that I want to dedicate this for the rest of forever, basically. No?
There's a beautiful line of poetry in Vrindavan Mahimamrita from Prabodhananda Saraswati. And he says, I entered into that land of Vrindavan and I felt overwhelmed by the affection of a million mothers. And I wanted only to know, how can I serve?
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, very, very irresistible way of replying to something irresistible in its own way. Yeah. Let me share this comment from Anya Like that she just shared. I think she knows you, Deva Madhava.
Oh, yes.
If we do service out of a sense of shame and unworthiness, then in essence, we burn ourselves out and the love connection to Krishna gets lost. And crying emoji to conclude. Yeah.
Lamentable.
Yeah. So share with us a few words on that particular point, Devamada. What do you think in terms of the shame and unworthiness dynamics? How much do you see them present in our community playing and how they play out, even without our noticing that? No, even without noticing that's actually happening.
That's what I wanted to call attention to. Is this is something that I recognize. I'll share an experience I had. A young man came to essentially join our community from another community, and he had something of a savings. It's not a huge amount, but for a young Hare Krishna boy, it was a decent amount of money, and he just wanted to give it all to me. You just take this, and I'd been around long enough at that point. I said, no, thank you.
That's not surrender.
Right. That's not actually service. And I'm not actually being your well-wisher and your senior, your authority, whatever, by accepting that. And a few years later, he thanked me for not accepting it. Yeah. But so to the point, that guilt and shame it's onboarded already. As an institution, our concern, if we're a part of the institution, the community, what language you'd like to use, our concern would be how to mitigate that, how to relieve the person of that. Unfortunately, sadly, people take advantage of it either knowingly or unknowingly. It's often exploited and leveraged, but you cannot get rid of it totally. And you may see someone, this is something Vrindavani, my wife, she's never been around so many converts. she's grown up in the movement and around those that grew up in the movement, which has its own challenge, of course. But she's never seen the psychoses of a convert so up close as she does now at the Harmony Collective, where most of us are coming into the community and into the culture. And she gets bothered by this a little bit, that she sees people's reason for doing something is not the reason to do it, but rather some need they're trying to fulfill, which they may even be completely unaware of, and just are compulsively doing, almost as a way to avoid. And I appreciate her calling attention to that for me, and it helps me try to stay vigilant and not try to take advantage of it, as is so easy to do as a leader. As I mentioned, that Pandora's box, when you take it off, your whole mechanism for getting anything done goes away. And you have to come up with this whole new value system for why people should do things. It is very inefficient. So I appreciate her calling my attention to that. At the same time, something I try and help her see, that it's either here or over there that they're going to do that. Who understands what's going on ostensibly, and can help to direct in a healthy way, either immediately or eventually, that energy. Better they do it here than over there. So it's not totally for naught that the person may behave that way. And if the association is strong, it will be purified and removed. But to be wary that it's not to exploit it, and to understand that it's inevitable on some level, are two things that I find important to consider.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing those words. Yeah, that reminds me of some of the things that I mentioned yesterday in the lecture on healthy and unhealthy templates between guru and disciple, and how much a guru should be, someone serving in the capacity of guru, how much he or she should be aware that, lots of people will come to me with codependency template or with lots of shame and guilt, and they won't notice that. They will think, I'm surrendering, I'm giving myself fully, and the guru cannot stop them from being like that from day one. So he or she has to be expert enough to coexist with all that toxicity in a way that is gradually redeemed, so to say, and transform into something else. But you have to remain aware. This is not actual surrender. This is not healthy. And if I take advantage of that, even without, if you are not expert enough, you can receive a shame and guilt from someone, and you don't understand that shame and guilt, and you end up exploiting the person without knowing you are exploiting the person, even because you are not expert enough to grasp the shame and guilt coming. And as you mentioned, on one side we have the shame and guilt that people brings already from in their own baggage of pre-converts, so to say. But also there is the shame and guilt that sometimes is instilled in the official narrative in a particular group or institution, sometimes in terms of, if you do like this, okay, if not, and comes all this shame and guilt subconscious narrative where you have to be in a certain way so you don't fall into the shame and guilt equation, so to say. And personally, I think that's not precisely something to nourish, to honor the faith of the participants. No? But on the contrary, like you make your whole, and I think many of us, that will be a fifth one to add in the Bhagavad Gita's verse, Chaturvidha Bhajante Mam. 4 types of people who approach me. One of them is full of shame and guilt, and somehow they are unconsciously trying to. But even more delicate are those who maybe even may join without shame and guilt, but may enter into the process and officially get the message. You have to have shame and guilt for be part of this. No, that's a currency in this neighborhood, so to say. No, so what do you think about that? The shame and guilt that sometimes is instilled in between the lines in the dynamics of an institution, of a group dynamics.
It's taught. Absolutely. I feel like on some level, again, it's like an unavoidable. As soon as there's standards, there's going to be shame and guilt. And then institution is by justice is blind, the Lady Justice, she has a blindfold on.
Mm.
So there is some truth to that objective standard, and we don't avoid that, especially in our community. How to, yeah, the temptation to like manipulate people with that is just so difficult when everybody has got some form of conditioning. How
Mhm.
to totally mitigate that? It's like it takes such vigilance
Mm.
uh, to be able, especially when you're a person in position of leadership or influence. It takes such vigilance. I don't know of any other antidote than to just be constantly self-examining. And I, one word that I've started to use, you mentioned, Maharaj, language, how it's important to maybe redefine some of these things we're so certain we understand. One term that I've tried to not use really at all anymore is false ego,
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I remember
because
you used a new one that I even put in my book, and I put in the end notes a thankful note for you. Yeah, but I don't
Hare
recall
Krishna.
now the name, which was like provisional identity or something.
In intermediary identity,
Intermediary. Okay. Yeah.
trying to call attention to the value of our conditioning, the
Yeah.
value of our relative experience, the value of our relative needs, and how those are a springboard into our eternal identity. And the whole conception of the falsity of the present ego
Mm.
then just lends itself to this very knee-jerk reaction we have to burn it all to the ground.
Mm.
Useless, kill it all, ignore it, I don't have to pay attention to it. And the results we've seen so many ways. And the leadership plays into that. Oh, your family, false ego. Your body, false ego. Your bank account, false ego. Do the
But,
things that I
but,
need you to do.
but
That's
give me your false ego in the form of your bank account.
I'll take your false ego and
We'll make it real.
I can
We'll
give it
make
to
it real.
Krishna.
Yeah, we'll make it real for you. Yeah.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
So that need to
Mm.
create an acceptance of, an appreciation for our present situation, and gratitude, recognizing how it connects me to God, how it facilitates my relationship with the devotees, how it allows me to offer something, not the best thing, the highest thing, most thing, but something, and how that will result in the end in the experience that we hanker for. Is maybe some of what can soften that tendency towards guilt and shame that's going to be there.
Yeah. Yeah. Very interesting point. How this type of emphasis on on denying basically of our present identity, which is risky. I mean, if someone comes with a particular sense of identity and tries to cut from it, tries, because you cannot do it from one day to another and be immersed in your seed that they have. So if you come with your sense of identity and someone tells all that is false, you cannot just press a button and be someone else in somewhere else, so to say. So that creates a very risky limbo to the bordering neurosis in some cases. Now, I remember Purnachandra Swami, and I repeat that many times in some lectures in his book Unspoken Obstacles on the Path to Bhakti. He analyzes the social historical dynamics of the Krishna consciousness movement in the 60s, when it began with Srila Prabhupada in the West. So, and how he say, I don't know if I ever saw such a social phenomenon where the whole group, a whole generation, suddenly from day to night drops out their sense of identity and their culture and tries to adapt a new culture immediately. Now, and he mentions the point, of course, you cannot do that, although you think you are doing that. And probably the result of dropping a culture and trying to embrace another one, the result is impersonalism, because you are not here nor there. So you think you have done it, but in time, you will get to know that you are still processing the whole transition, so to say, no? So, and again, that's a variety of impersonalism, which unconsciously we may be promoting in the name of radical personalism. Let me share one comment from Brinda Sundari. She shared a few minutes ago. She said she appreciates something we said before: our normal humanness as a part of our bhakti project. Ultimately, even normal humanness is potent enough to purify us. Simply being open to the design of the human experience as being slanted to self-realization. and how potent it is when juxtaposed with bhakti. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we can separate bhakti from humanness. If you take away the word humanness, bhakti is no longer bhakti, because bhakti is not inhuman. Bhakti is fully divine and fully human. So, but yeah, I appreciate your words,
I
Brindasun.
like that word, slanted.
What's slanted? I didn't get that one in my English glossary. I haven't get to that adhikar
Oh,
of
it's
English.
like it's angled, like a hill is
Mm,
slanted.
mm,
It's going, like, if I'm actually living out my humanity in a healthy
mm,
way, it's naturally oriented towards God.
mm, mm, mm. Great. Yeah, that's the thing. No, I mean, for us, humanity, atatu brahma jignasana, humanity naturally expressed tends towards the divine. But interestingly, the divine naturally conceived tends towards the human as well. I mean, there's the two of them cannot coexist separately, at least in our Gaudiya conception.
Mm.
Human and divine are not divorced, but I think we have divorced them enough, as you mentioned, by this type of you are not this, you are not that, this is false ego, and there has been lots of uh, how to say, yeah, different shades of impersonalism, like your relationship with your body is wrong, your relationship with your emotions are false, this world is profane, uh, and so on and so forth. So impersonal, 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 impersonal. So I don't want to say we end up being more Mayabada, the official Advaita Vedantins, but we may end up being more dangerous in the sense that we are lip service saying something, but giving another message in between the lines sometimes. So that's delicate.
There's the writer of, it's in Moby Dick,
Mm.
Herman Melville. He writes, one of the characters has to share a room for the night with someone. He has a choice. And he says, I'd rather sleep with a sober cannibal than a drunken Christian.
Okay. Okay.
Because at least the sober cannibal is straightforward.
I'll eat you. Yeah.
I know what I'm dealing with there. But the drunken Christian, you don't know what you're going to get from that guy, because he
No.
said this was back in 1800s when Christianity had some standard of decorum. So
Mhm.
you're dealing with a drunken Christian. You don't know what that guy's about, because it's hypocrisy.
Hmm. Hmm.
You're reminding me, Maharaj, that those devotees, it's ironic now. I was laughing about this some weeks ago with some friends. Those devotees who are most adamantly, you're not your body, they're also those who are most adamant about telling people what body they are in at present.
Mhm.
So there's this, a woman is a woman and a man is a man, and that whole, so in an ironic way, that group within our community is calling attention to the value of the human experience,
Hmm.
the need to be aware of it for ourselves and to integrate it rather than to deny it.
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting how the things play out. Even if you overtly say something, how unconsciously all the other stuff is slipping in. No, so
Yeah.
but yeah, I totally appreciate that point you made regarding Moby Dick. How much potential danger there is in rendering lip service to a particular ideal or tradition, and it's so tempting, especially I mentioned that in my book, for us as Gaudias, which we have such a sophisticated theology and way of presenting what we are about, that the more sophisticated the presentation, the more chances to hide behind that presentation how much you are going against that actually. So we have such a noble discourse, so to say, a noble way of introducing ourselves to the world, that gives us so many opportunities to hide behind concepts, basically to hide behind concepts, and not embrace actual reality and the actual actualization of those concepts in our own self, in our own example. So
Mm.
we are blessed by that. We are blessed by such a detailed, deep, broad philosophy. But as you mentioned, it can have two. Well, Prabhupada say that. No, what's the expression in English? This razor blade. That Krishna consciousness is like a razor
A
blade.
razor's edge. Yeah. Right.
Okay, that you can have a nice shaving, or you can just cut yourself or
Got
become a
yourself.
serial killer with it. No?
Hare Krishna.
So, yeah, yeah. Something else, Devamada, we are reaching the antelila of our episode. So I don't know
It
if you
does.
would like to share some final thoughts or something else you may like to add if you were thinking about contributing something that I missed.
Um, it's just coming now. I was like kind of circling back in my own head, thinking it's we're winding down now. The value of the institution. I'd like to say something about that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
since we uh,
Yeah, of course.
pointed out a lot of the things that it does get in the way of. I'm reading a book called Francis and His Brothers,
Hmm.
and it's a history mostly of the development of the Franciscan mission after his departure.
Hmm.
So a little bit of discussion about his life and how he became recognized by the Catholic Church, but mostly about how they dealt with his departure and the centuries afterwards, how things developed. Obviously, parallels for where I find myself within the assembly line of Mahaprabhu's movement. We just had a period of very charismatic and potent devotees present, and now the Gaudiya community is dealing with their lack of presence. So I see there that what the institution that was set up around Francis, who was himself just a saint, a sadhu in the straightforward sense of the term, didn't need anything from anyone and wanted to give it all to everyone he met, Bas, and had no problem, no difficulty living that life. He naturally attracted so many others who wanted to be able to live that life, saw that as an ideal, but didn't have the capacity to live out that ideal.
Mm-hmm.
And what the institution provides is kind of crutches, training wheels, to be able to strengthen that capacity to the point of an individual experiencing that and expressing it themselves. And so I just had knee surgery a year and a half ago, and I was on crutches for some time. And there's a warning that they give you not to let the crutch become a crutch,
Hmm.
to understand that this is an intermediary period of your healing, where in which you need this support so that one day you don't need that support.
Mm-hmm.
And if that recognition is there of the determination of the institution, not ultimately, but in the lives of an individual within it,
Hmm.
that the goal of the institution, and this is where I come in with my university example, is to graduate.
Hmm.
The goal of school is to not have to go to school anymore.
Mm-hmm.
If that can be brought back into everyone's awareness, from the organization itself to the members within it, then I think we will start to recognize and feel much more deeply the opportunity of the institution, which is this context within which I can live to an ideal that otherwise I'm not able to live up to. I wouldn't be able to come to without that support that I'm being provided by the structure created. I would only be able to uh, look at it, but not engage with it in a meaningful way.
Hmm. Beautiful. Thank you so much, Deva Madhava. Yeah, yeah. Institution like yeah, providing an ideal and facilitating an experience of that ideal, of getting closer and closer to that ideal. Yeah, love it. Very, 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 very beautiful. And
My pranams to Mukunda Prabhu. I saw him in the chat. He's
Jai, Mukunda Prabhu, Dandava. Yeah, I totally agree. I appreciate the example, the metaphor you made also as well, that the role of the institution is just to assist you in certain particular experience, and is there to accompany, to support a particular experience that you are supposed to have. Again, it's not the institution will have the experience for you, or will provide in every sense the experience. It will provide certain context and support and vessel for one to also enter into that in a certain way, in a vulnerable way, hopefully, and have a particular experience. And for me, that's the actual joining of the institution. And I always come back to this idea that actually we cannot join an institution, but we can join a heart that happens to be beating in a particular institution. No, because you cannot belong to an institution. You belong to people. No, that's, again, let's keep it personal. So you belong to another heart that is beating in a way that makes your heart beat, and happens to be in a certain institution. So that particular beating invites you to join and to have a particular, as you mentioned, experience and support. So yeah, I really appreciate that you chose to conclude with this positive note, because of course, again, I mentioned in the beginning, but it's also nice to make it at the end, like we are not against institution. The podcast is not about dethrone all these type of structures, but let's reflect about the purpose of them, and let's not stop reflecting about that, because institution may have a purpose at one point, eventually will have another purpose, eventually will have another purpose, or the same purpose will have to be revised in each generation and more than that. So that's our humble attempt today also, no? A little introspection in that connection. So thank you so much, Deva Madhava Prabhu. I really appreciate your contribution, your friendship, your ideas, your commitment, your responsibility in connection to all
Thank
this
you for all the
community.
support and upliftment and insight you provide, Maharaj. We're looking forward to being in person after a year
Yeah,
very soon.
yeah. Thank you so much. And I will share again before concluding, for those who would like to know more about Deva Madhava Prabhu, his projects. This is the link to the community he's leading, the Harmony Collective.org. You can find that. That's in Michigan. And again, the following weekend, we will have this retreat on radical personalism with Deva Madhava Prabhu and Jai Jagannath Prabhu as well. And here's the link for those who would like to join. Tickettailor.com/events/the Harmony Collective/939416. Do we have some space yet there, Deva Madhava?
We always make space. We're still Hare Krishnas at heart, so it might end up a refugee camp, but if you want to come, we'll find a spot.
That's it. That's how I like it. Thank you so much. Next week, I'll be having, since we will having this retreat on the weekend, I will be doing the next podcast on Thursday. So next Thursday, 27 July, we'll having another episode with Tamal Krishna Prabhu, another friend and kindred spirit, and that will be at the same time, 10 a.m. EDT time. And the topic will be living prayer. So we'll talk about prayer, about how to live prayer, what does it mean to live a life of prayer, and what's a living prayer. If you want to take living, whether as an adjective or as a verb, we'll be talking about that this next Thursday. So we'll be sharing the info these days also as well. So thank you so much, Deva Madhava Prabhu. Thank you so much to all of you for connecting, and see you very soon in another episode of the Free Radical Podcast.
Go Ranga.